Hi, this is Justin for CGT345, and this week I'm showing my contribution to the team for our prototype of the game Summit. So the prompt we were given for this assignment was to create a game based around moving lights or dancing lights. So what we came up with was an idea of this exploration-based game, um, a lot like games by the Chinese Room, who made Everybody's Gone to the Rapture and Amnesia. And we wanted to create a game in which these lights would inform the exploration and the path that the player takes. The central mechanic revolves around keys and locks. So basically, each gate in the game has an associated pedestal, and each associated pedestal needs a certain colored light to basically make the barrier disappear. So I was in charge of level design, and I also did some light scripting work based off work by Colton. The game is basically about exploring and climbing up a huge mountain. In creating the level design for this game, I looked at a lot of different sources. The big ones, of course, were Breath of the Wild, and I also looked at a talk by a Naughty Dog designer called David Shaver, who talked a lot about how Naughty Dog guides the player using different techniques. I also looked at games like Dark Souls, and also was greatly inspired by Nintendo 64 era adventure games. And what I mean by Nintendo 64 adventure game level design is that you'd see the thing that you're trying to get, such as like a heart container, and you just have to figure out how to get there by using the tools you're given or the game's physics. And I feel like the reason why this is not so big today as it was back then is because there isn't such a huge focus on collectibles, and that these collectibles aren't huge floating heart containers or health packs in the world, and also the levels are a lot less like contained arenas. So first I designed the height map to this, and I built it around the idea of perspective. So the player spawns quite a while outside the mountain, and the only thing they can see is, and we used effects such as exponential height fog to increase the atmosphere, and I played with the skylight as well. So one of the big things that was seen in the David Shaver talk was the idea of a visual language, and for me that was pretty simple. All I did was separate the sides of the wall from the ground by putting this white snow texture over the entire ground. And this white snow texture is just a material I made. It just uses some noise and a color, and it multiplies them together and puts them into one of the channels for the height map. And for the height map, I also looked at the tutorial made by Nathan for 345, which was really useful. Another idea that I took from that Shaver talk was the idea of landmarks or weenies, and this again ties into the sense of adventure that we were trying to create. And you'd basically see these landmarks, and you'd have to figure out how to get there. And a lot of the way this is tied together is with framing and composition. So, for example, there are two landmarks, and both of them are these cylindrical towers. And the first one you can as soon as you have to interact with the first puzzle, and the camera is kind of forced in this direction by what's called a pinch, where the geometry is created in such a way that the player just looks where the designer wants them to look. So yeah, the first landmark is up on the hill, and the player can see it, and they have to wonder how to get there. Another thing that I did for that landmark was that the player has to interact with the pedestal that leads up to the landmark. The player has to interact with that landmark in order to proceed in the game. Another one, which is an optional path in the game, is a landmark that you see once you pick up another mandatory orb. You don't have to go there, but I just wanted to make sure that the player was aware of it. So the game's mechanics work around locks and keys. So I actually ripped out a lot of Colton's original code because it would have been very complicated to try convey a lot of it to the player. So originally it was based around picking up the orbs and then changing their colors, putting them with the pedestals and making sure that the colors lined up in a certain pattern in order to unlock it. The original example was that you'd have to line up 6 orbs with the colors of the rainbow to unlock the gate. However, I changed this so that each gate has an associated color, and all you need to do is put the orb in the associated pedestal to unlock the gate. The opposite of this is the idea of, for example, these stairs, which the player has to interact with for the first landmark. This works in an opposite fashion to the gates. So the player has to put down an orb to make some stairs or a bridge appear. So by creating this system of keys and locks, the player has to interact with parts of the environment in order to move forward. It's intended to create a greater sense of exploration as well as make the player really interact with the environment. Another thing that I tried to do with this was to organically teach the player about different concepts, as the puzzle is explained in a very simple way and then it gradually ramps up in complexity. So the player is forced to interact with this first bridge or else they can't proceed. And since the orb's right next to it, they don't have to think much about picking it up and putting it in the pedestal. So I did change a lot of the original code that Colton made. So Colton wrote the original barrier code, and I basically just inverted it. I had to change it around a bit because of a variety of different factors, namely that the blueprint would not know which actor it was referencing. So the way I make it appear and disappear is that I hide it and I also disable its collision. And then when the pedestal detects that the right color's in it, then it enables collision and also shows the object. Another thing that I changed was that since each orb was originally colorless, I changed it so that each orb has an inherent color and you can't change it, and also that you'd know which orb links up to which gate by looking at the color of the gate. So I just did a big conditional statement that changes the material of the gate to match the material of the orb. I did not get this to work on the BP appear, so there isn't really a way of figuring out which colored orb fits into the right pedestal to make the stairs and the bridge appear. But the puzzles for making things appear are much more simple. So one that I also added was the ability to put down an orb once you picked it up, just in case you picked up the wrong orb. But given more time, I would have added an option to take the orb off the pedestal if it's the wrong orb, which is something that Paul wasn't able to do in his video, and also adding more complex puzzles. So we'd have to figure out a way to hint at the solution to some of these puzzles. Another thing that we originally wanted to do that we knew we would not be able to due to the time constraint was that we wanted to put some sort of storytelling in the game. So if you look at all these orbs, you could replace these with audio diaries or any other sort of collectible. But the gist of it is that the lights are just meant to drive the exploration and where the player goes.